Go ahead, Poh Moi. Introduce
Okay.
yourself.
Okay. Just to take a little note, the spelling of my name with a missing I is Poh Moi. And just also a little interesting joke. I have people calling me Poh Moi, but very difficult for them to put it as Poh Moi. I have no idea why. Anyway, a quick backdrop. I've been in the learning atmosphere, learning space, or learning ecosystem by the Lord's design from my very first job. That places it as 41 years now. It certainly has no predetermination on my side. When I came out of school, I had a biology degree. What's available to me is either teaching back in 1980, or a handful of us refused to go into teaching, so I ended up with a science center. So that really gave me a very, the first introduction to how to make learning fun. Catapulted into a few more years. I went to US, did a couple of master's degree there, came back, worked with Anderson Consulting, and with a company that did multimedia learning for MINDEF, and then started my own company. Because of time, I will just skip all that. If you want to get to know me more, we can always chat post the session. So for today's session is part one of 3 webinars. The first one we thought we start on, everybody wants to know about measurement of learning. Second one, I thought it would be quite interesting to correlate learning back to biblical scriptures and how Jesus and how the Lord taught through Old Testament, New Testament as well. And then the last one being, now that we shift into online, what are some of the things to bear in mind? So this is a broad brush of the 3. So tonight is a potpourri of slides really to get us thinking about, before we talk about measurement, what are some of the things we need to do first before we even talk about measurement. So let me bring my slide back in the picture. Can you all see my screen? Is my screen, or did I stop share?
No, we can't see it.
Okay, looks like I stopped share, so just let me get into. Okay, I'm using this system that is new, so it was working fine as always. Murphy's law will always work. Give me a minute. Pardon me. There we go. I found what I needed. Great. Okay, we should be able to see my screen now. Yes?
Yes,
Yes,
we
we
can
can see it now. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So first, I wanted us to be able to do a quick chit chat. This, whenever you see this little chicken writing notes, is like a survey or poll kind of a thing. So the statement I want to make here is, learning is not an event; it is a journey. Do you agree or you disagree? So you can either use the annotate. You are familiar with the annotate function, and you just put your tick, whether it's the thumbs up or thumbs down. If not, you can, because there's only a few of us, you can all just comment. How many agree? Somebody's talking? Oh, good. Somebody's marking. Okay, everybody agrees, I will assume then. Okay, the reason why I make a statement like this is, Su Chen and I had earlier was saying that during this time, a lot of people are taking up classes. So people are beginning to see the opportunity to use training as a mechanism, if you will, to reach out or to make money. So they tend to treat training as an event, whereas actually, and when we treat it as an event, it becomes largely transactional. The content tend to be very transactional. Do this, don't do that, followed by this, and then followed by that. Or otherwise, it's edutainment. That means we put in a lot of humor, a lot of drama to make people happy. So those have become sort of colored the learning world. So I wanted to set that as a context and then bring us into this one. I will have to clean up the annotation. Let's see, where do I do the cleaning up? Clear, okay, there we go. So this is a little animation of what happens when we interact with information. So our first interaction is data, right? So we walk past a bus stand and there's a little poster. So I'll use the context of health and exercise. So we see somebody inviting you to a gym. It's just a data set. It has no relevance, no context, no nothing to you. And how does that become information? It becomes information when we start to sort of have individual experience with that information. So maybe some friends are talking about it, you say, oh, you know, we're putting on the inches because we're at home so much. So there's just information at that stage. Now notice that there is really no correlation or conditioning, meaning it has no direct impact on my life. There is no reinforcement of that message that goes deep into my memory. So you see on the top left is short-term memory, and then towards the right over time is the long-term memory. So whatever sits on this side is short-term memory at this stage. Okay. So going from here, how does it go from information into knowledge? Now, as the individual consuming that data set that has now become information to me, I'm trying to give meaning to that and meaning and context to those information. So say, for example, now I started to, at my age group, have a lot of joint pains and some autoimmune issues where I cannot help but realize that I need to do something. So I'm paying attention now to the pain and to the messaging out there about exercise that will help relieve the pain. So slowly now I'm beginning to build the threads and the bins that will come, that those terminology will come in the next slide. So, okay, so over a period of time, as I now realize that there is a correlation between pains in my joints and exercise, now I start to pay more attention to finding out more information, if you will. So I will start to read up, I will pay attention to videos, I'll pay attention to websites, I'll talk to more friends, I might actually consult with a doctor or a gym person. Now, so now with knowledge that is built, I understand concepts and understand the relationship between joints and not exercising. So comes the item called conditioning. Conditioning is actually part of Skinner, Skinner, from long back. He's no longer around. He came up with this operant conditioning. S stands for stimulus, R stands for response. If there's a certain stimulus, there will be a certain response. So through this journey of, if I sit for too long, that's the stimulus, I will get the pain, that's the response. So this is a combination of positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. It starts to build that knowledge deeper into me. So now I'm not just having a disassociated interest, but now it means a lot to me why certain exercise is good for me, why a certain posture is bad for me. So I start to pay attention to all those things. So from there, I move into wisdom. So you notice that data set has none of this. So as I move across that spectrum, wisdom comes in. Now that has to affect my neural pathways. I begin to have a stronger buy-in into the fact that I can't run away from the fact that if I don't sit well, my posture is bad, my pain will come. Or if I do not pay attention to what I eat, certain food will give me the pain. I can't get away from that. So now I become the person going to tell everybody else. I look out for my friends and say, hey, don't eat that food. So I'm now the wiser person. I'm built also a second nature. So the moment I look at a certain type of food, I automatically say no to it. So that's the second nature part to it. Okay. So now if I dovetail this together with the passion of that particular domain area, which comes in also from personal values, right? The spirit man is not just the intellectual, it's now the spirit man is also involved because my personal passion is involved. So then the cycle will go. This will become my conscious learning. It's not accidental learning, it's not hidden learning, it's actually very conscious on my mind. There's certain lifestyle, certain food, certain posture is bad for me, and then that will lead me into continuous learning, and I'll be more sensitive, more predisposed to certain data sets. Maybe now I'm reading up more about supplements. So that's the cycle of when we move from short-term to long-term memory. Now, the next slide builds on this. Okay, so before I go to the next slide, just want to say this is what links to the next slide. We are talking about awareness. When it's data set, it really is just information thrown at me. I don't really care about it. It's there, it's not there. But once I'm able to articulate and be able to chew on, digest on that information, I start to associate, I start to adopt, I start to anchor. That's when it starts to go into my long-term memory. Okay, so this kind of dovetail with a diagram called change management curve created by Connor and Patterson. But if you look at it, I will bring back the terms. Forget about contact. Contact is just the entry point. It's awareness. Articulating is the whole understanding bit. Associating with the positive and the negative, that will also increase my adoption. And then increases when it comes to internalization, that's equivalent to anchoring. So this is when we prepare people for in training. This lower section is just preparation. It's really just at informing. When we give information to inform, that's actually not learning. It's just information that can decay very fast. Next slide will articulate that. So then when we really want people to start to move into acceptance phase, that's when we go into the educating, if you will, a bit more deep dive, a bit more procedural, a bit more conceptual. And then finally, once we cover that, we want them to build it into second nature, into anchoring it as part of who they are on a day-to-day. We need them to go into commitment. Okay, so ultimately that leads to the vision. So any questions so far? If I've lost you all along the way, please help me by speaking, because I'm not looking at the chat at this moment.
So, Poh Moi, just back to that chart.
Yeah.
Where does the critical thinking, right? Or I mean, we need to. There's so much out there, right? And to understand, or even to try to buy in, and we get influenced everywhere, especially children. And all that. So if we all don't learn to, filter, think critically. So where would that come in? I mean, is that something we can cover later?
Yeah, in my last slide, I will cover that. Okay. But it would probably sit here, because this, like I say, is see today, throw away tomorrow. It doesn't stick. Then it starts to get a bit sticky here. So this is the one where we go through training. Then the tendency, like I say, in certain training sessions, it tend to be very transactional. Mindfulness, 5 points. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do that. Step 5, do that. That is really very much in terms of a mental, intellectual understanding. As they say, right? From the head to the heart is the longest mile. So really for it to get into second nature, so that the moment I start to look at the content, my brain automatically asks, is this for real or is this not? That's the second nature, and that's the anchoring part. So hence, it's really much more effort there. But it has to start from the awareness stage. So looking at my church youth group, They are very much around the awareness stage right now, beginning to look at questioning and understanding that not everything they read is real, but they certainly don't do it on a second nature basis. Today they listen to it, tomorrow go out there, they will just listen to whatever their friend says. Does that answer your question, Suchen? Essentially, it's up here. Okay, I assume you are okay, Suchen?
Thanks.
Okay. So here, I'm just giving you a glimpse of when a new experience happens, what is that situation inside the brain. This is a really diluted, a very simplified version of something very much more complex. Okay, so if you just let the thing go for a while, then I'll talk after the animation finishes. Okay, so basically every time we come across a new experience, our immediate response in the head is to want to find a place to plant into our neural pathways. So we will look for what I call thread 1, thread 2. This is a conceptual term. That means we'll look for familiar existing paradigms, experiences. It could be positive, it could be negative. So if it's something that is traumatic in my past, immediately I would take an association and I will form an immediate opinion about it. So if I bring in my basal instinct, the fight or flight bit in the base of the brain called the amygdala, that means if I have this new experience, it actually may not be harmful to me, but immediately I will throw up a wall because my traumatic experience tells me this is bad, but actually it is not. So those things happen. Or it could be, I remembered a nice cup of coffee with someone. So it's a very pleasant feeling. And so all that has a lot to play with when a new experience enter our brain, how we plant it, where we plant it. So this is, like I said, is a very, very overly simplified picture of how we bring a new experience into our brain. Again, going from short term into long term. For it to go into long term, we have to be conscientious and conscious of what we are learning. Okay? So to make sense of the new experience, it involves the mind, the emotion, and the will. This part, the amygdala, is what I said earlier, is the part that controls our emotion, that can override or color the intellectual part, which is the prefrontal cortex area here. So I might actually be learning something positive, good, but my brain is going to my amygdala is going to throw a curve to me. I may or may not use that information in the way that I have learned it. So that's why self-sabotage is part of this. So this is, again, a very, very simplified snapshot. I like to use the illustration. I assume, Susan Hoover, you being in KL or Malaysia, the context of the culture should be okay for you. But I'm talking about the coffee shop, the auntie or the uncle who is taking the order for drinks. Any range of 4 or 5 people, we will say kopi o kosong, kopi kau, siu dai. And if you notice that person is able to remember all of that information, no less he yells it or she yells it to the person who prepares that drink. But that's the ability of the short-term memory to hold the information. But granted, the moment he's yelled out the information, he's done his job, he starts to take the order from another group of people, this information will disappear from his head, okay? Which is what is the next point. The moment you don't use the information and new information comes into your brain, it is displaced. Whatever that short-term memory is displaced. So within 12 to 30 seconds is what it stays in the brain. For it to stay longer, it is said that we need to rehearse it, maintain it longer than 20 seconds for that time, but it's not a one-time thing. We have to do that continuous maintenance, which is this point. Just simply repeating the information, mugging. We are all very good in Asia to mug to pass the exams. pass the exam, everything we give back to the professor. So what stays in our long-term memory is what I come back to earlier. We have that passion, we have that elaborate conditioning, we associate, we build context, and really love that content. Then with that long, arduous process of developing that relationship, then it goes into long-term memory. So that's what we call deep learning, which comes up in this slide. So the term constructivism is one of those theories out there. So from this particular slide, I think if I can go back here, we go with existing schemas. So these are just a representation of what I said earlier about the different threads in our brain. So this is the schema. So when we have a new learning, it comes and it joins with our existing schema, and something happens, okay? So in this case, when we build the connection between the new and the existing learning, that means whatever we've learned in our existing paradigms, the understanding clicks in place. I can reason with this new learning, and then I can actually use this new learning. I would love to, in a few more slides, I'm going to look at the whole COVID thing. Before COVID, there are a lot of things we don't do. But suddenly, with the COVID, our lives changed. So what are some of those deep learning that comes out of it? Okay. So whether we have a reformed thought or behavior, that also depends on what we use that information and how we interact that information on an ongoing basis. So just a quick quotation as we move towards deep learning. I've adapted this saying. Some of you have seen this. I laugh because a lot of people quote it. Some people say Lao Tzu, some people say Confucius, some people say some ancient man. So really don't know who originated this. But I've changed it a little bit. So back to the whole 3-4 slides are all saying the same thing. If you merely tell me, which is the data information awareness level, I will forget. But if you show me how this information is relevant to me, which is where it shifts towards knowledge, I will remember better. But if you involve me, which comes into the building from knowledge into deeper knowledge, I will understand even more. Now, if you step back and you allow me to try without fear of failure, i.e. a safe space, I will act, which is then leading towards the long-term memory associated with wisdom. Okay, this is a very technical slide, but I'll try and make it simple for you. This guy who came up with the theory called COPE, experimentation cycle, learning cycle, his version is slightly different. So Harvard in 1999 made an adaptation of his, which makes learning into these few steps. First, you identify, then you reflect, then you consider, then you decide, then you reflect again, and then you experience, and then you conclude. So this is back to your question, Suchen, that a lot of times when we jump straight and conclude, we miss all the steps in between. But if we really go through all these steps before concluding, then we are actually practicing some of those critical thinking. Okay, after I conclude, I might actually reconsider if I have new information. And then I plan with that new information. And then the experience is slightly different from this. This experience is the iterative experience. This becomes wisdom-related experience. So this is very interesting because this really should be the discipline in our brain as we encounter new information. Okay. So now I'm taking a slightly different diagram now. Bear with me, this is rather complex, but I will walk you through. This is called the triple loop learning by those respective individuals. After I go through this, I want to maybe open up a discussion using COVID to illustrate this, but it will be a discussed session. It won't be me telling, because even I'm learning alongside with all of you. So basically, when we say we have an intended outcome, okay, it goes through this 4, which is part of Cope's learning cycle earlier. is reflective observation. Okay, let me start from the right side because this is the concrete evidence. So this is easy for everyone to manage because it's very concrete. So as you move towards the left, it gets less concrete and more abstract. So once I have the concrete evidence, I'm actually now to do active experimentation. It could be the same question about the same term about experiencing, reflecting, checking. And then I form some kind of a mental model, which is a bit more abstract. And then as I moved on, now I actually go back into reflective observation. Now I have the mental model. I question whether my mental model is okay, not okay, passé, or very weak. Okay, so let's go with this first one that's called a single loop. Basically, single loop is just very simple. I identify some issues. Things are not right. I need to do something to close the gap. Okay, so this is single loop, and associated with single loop is what we say reacting, doing things right. So basically, with COVID that came, every one of us are reacting. Don't go out. Please don't go out. Don't do this. Don't do that. Everything is don't. So that's a whole lot of reacting at that time, because the fastest thing we can do is at least do the basic hygiene stuff. Still no idea whether at the early stage whether it's transmitted by air or transmitted by surface. Doesn't matter. Just do this one first. Just, if you were another way of putting it, I put the nail is not going into the wood. I just hammer it harder. I just keep hammering it harder till it goes into the wood. Very reactionary in that sense. Okay, so that's what's called single loop. Now the double loop, besides the single loop, I needed to take it out to make it less cluttered. I'll come back to it later. This time around, you notice is past this two, it starts to go into mental model. First, besides looking at there's a gap, I need to do something better, I'm also needing to ask, is my mental model correct? Do I need to even change the way my mental model works? What are the assumptions I've taken to associate, to say that my mental model is correct? So I need to change those assumptions. Okay, if need be, I adapt the model to use. So this is starts to go into the more abstract, away from the concrete. So that's what we call the double loop. Double meaning it includes the single loop. So both the green area and the orange area. And this is what we call reframing. And instead of looking at doing things right, we're looking at doing the right things. So we refocus energy to do the right things. So the early stage was really a lot of panic and reactionary for COVID. So now doing the right things is making sure the elderly folks are not exposed and they are more vulnerable, and then making sure that certain policies are in place where early days there was no CB yet, so there were a lot of those things. So we start to go into CB by doing the right things rather. So that's a second loop. There's a third loop. Okay. In this case, we are actually going to ask a question that says, hey, beyond the outcome that we want and the model, are there certain things that we have not looked at? Have we, done a deep enough root cause analysis to discover things that we never challenged ourselves before? So came all those discussions about whether it's how far does the virus go when somebody coughs, whether it stays on the surface of metal or cloth or whatever. So discuss with all the various stakeholders, and now we revisit the context and see and reflect on that. Okay, so the triple loop means it includes the second and the third. Okay, second and the first. In this case, the focus here is we decide what is right. Earlier is just doing things right, then doing the right things, and now is what is right. We don't know what is right. Even till date, COVID, right? We don't know what's right. We are just going with what we think is right. So by questioning what is right, we're actually moving away from reacting to reframing to transforming. So in the sense, coming back to the question of Su Chen, since that's the context about critical thinking, just at this stage of reacting, there's no critical thinking. There's just something is not right, fix it. Take a course, study the course within it. But once we start to move into, let me then go to this diagram, which takes all three. As you can see, it's very complex. So when we do all of these three, okay, that's when critical thinking is really the most profound. But this is maybe a bit tough for the younger people. And this is where the older generation should take the opportunity to be the leader, the facilitator, to get the young people to think, to discuss. And they are the ones, the older folks, to summarize and glean from those discussions what are the new nuggets. For the young people, they will still tend to be here. I think we all see the situation across the world. They're all reacting to Black Lives Matters. If somebody says all life matters, the whole world melts down. So those are a lot of reacting type of scenarios. Reframing is, hey, look, let's all come to the table and look at our policies. I'm talking about the US scenario. Let's look at the policies that reduces the type of firearms or the type of defense the police would use when they feel they are intimidated. So they are reframing. Then now they're actually going to come and say, hey, defund the police. I'm not saying that's an actually positive thing, but they are actually in that stage where they are looking at maybe some of the money can go to helping the youth and the society, the socially outcast who are potentially easily taken into drugs and violence. Okay, I'll take a pause here. Questions, clarifications? Anyone needs me to repeat on anything?
Nothing.
Nothing? I proceed. Okay, so coming back to moving learning from short-term awareness into long-term, something that we really can recall from our brain, not from a reactionary perspective, but hopefully from a reframing and a transforming perspective. So this is a little bit into when we design learning, we need to look at the right scope, the right sequencing of it, the right pacing, and then the taughtness. That means to a certain degree, this is, I have other slides on this, but I'll take it from here. Too often training or learning tend to create a very comfortable environment. Everybody sits back and, if you will, everybody slouch and then a nice aircon environment. Everybody makes the training house or the facilitator makes every effort to make the environment extremely comfortable, good food, nice breaks. Actually, from all research, from many different camps, that is the very environment that learning doesn't happen. To truly have learning happen, the next session in the webinar, it really need to disturb the equilibrium. We really need to use discomfort in a strategic way to cause people to rethink. So the challenge has to be there to bring out that discomfort. If all we focus on is comfort, there is really not going to be any impactful learning. I'll skip over the slide for now. Okay, so now in all learning, we must link it to performance. Now, granted, in the business world, performance is business performance, but even in the Christian world, we are also looking at same missions, outcomes, any range of what do you call that thing? Impact that you're looking for. So whatever we do, we must be seeking that impact. Otherwise, what's the point of making all this effort to create the training, so to speak, right? So to me, I want to say, actually, it's all about decision making. Whether I learn this skill or that skill, the impact of the values that I bring to the learning, as well as the environment, be it organizationally or the group I'm part of, whatever that value causes the conditioning of the new skills I'm learning or the new knowledge I'm building, at the end of the day, it's going to help me make decisions. If it doesn't help me make decisions, then what's the purpose of all this learning? So to me, what's a culture? A culture is an individual forming habits, right? So let's say 4 of us are in this class, and all of us are going through the process of forming habits. So as all 4 of us are forming the habit together, that is what I would say is the culture of that group, because we have together learning a habit, say, of questioning, thinking through whether what we see, what we hear is correct or not. So at the end of the day, all training, all learning is supposed to impact decision making. That's where long-term memory is in fact impacted. And also, failure is a friend in this kind of decision making. We should not avoid or refrain from making mistakes. We should be welcoming the mistakes or the failure as a part of the iterative process of building the new paradigm. Hence, to look at learning as a development and not an event. Okay, so this is one of my pet peeves. Training does not equal learning. Learning does not equal performance. So back to earlier, those few slides, training could just well be giving me just awareness. Learning is when you start allowing me to interact and associate and make mistakes and have my ahas. Performance is when I actually can execute that decision or that action without having to sit in a class to do it, if you will. Okay, so I'm also going to skip through this. Okay, I want to now move into the last mile of it, which is on the measuring part. Okay, so I've taken somebody's diagram, and unfortunately was trying very hard to look for the originator of this diagram. I can't find the information. So when we're measuring, the key thing we need to ask is, when we're measuring learning, what are we measuring? And then how are we measuring? Okay, so earlier we talked about awareness and all the stuff, right? So there's this quadrant thingy that goes from unconscious incompetence, I don't even know that I don't know. Then I'm aware that I don't know. Then I become aware that I know. Then now I come into a new set of content. I realize that I'm back to, I'm unconscious that I'm actually, sorry. So I move from conscious competence, means I know. Then I move into a stage that actually I already become an expert. I don't even know that I have become an expert. But then we'll go back into the cycle where we hit new type of learning. Okay, so when we say we want to measure, why do we want to measure? For what purpose do you need that information? And then where are you going to get that information? Is it a valid source? Is it easy to get information? Is it consistent? Then what type of information you're going to get? Is this just mere happy, not happy? Or is it going to be something more specific to, I am able to do this behavior because? And how are you going to collect that information? And then after that, is your data usable? Because since the last 15 years, we have learning management systems, we have all kinds of databases, huge amount of data. I can tell you HR, human resource, throws out a lot of data they don't use, but it's all collected. So don't waste time and effort to collect data that we're not going to use. Then after that, what about if you're going to throw out a survey or any range of effort to collect the information? Are you going to get the response? Back to how, are you going to make it easy and motivated for make it easy for the person to want to be motivated to give you the information? And what if you need to follow up? What if the information is not sufficient? So then after all that, if you have gone through all the series of questions, how do you intend to turn that data into an actionable item? Which I like to say, begin with the end in mind. Whatever we're going to measure, let's begin with the end in mind, which is this first. First, decide what is it that you need that information for, which is why. Then you need to figure out all these questions, all these other questions. Okay, so just a little fun poll, if you will. I've taken this from Deloitte, one of the, I think, recent surveys that they've done. So there are 3 numbers here. These 2 are very close to one another, and then 44 is very high. So of these three, comfort, connection, and contribution, which do you think that people say is the most important in their developmental journey? In this case, is business context. And you can use the annotation and mark as well. Circle, tick. Which one do you think is the 44%? One person? The others? Okay, 2%. Don't remove your tick mark, so then we can see how many people go for it. Okay, again, watching the time. Actually, most of you got it correct. Most people think is comfort. Actually, 44% is contribution, 25% is connection, only 21% is for comfort. So, which means if this data is there, then during the time when we deliver the training, these are the things we need to pay attention to, rather than making the workplace the authentic self and being treated fairly. They are important, but actually this is more important. Okay, just a fun thing here. Okay, now, so what and how we make. I said earlier, we need to begin with the end in mind. So at the bottom of this 2 dimension, this is less complex, this is more complex. This one, the meaningful impact of the measurement, this side will be more in terms of ease of administration. Okay, so my error there. Okay, so at the bottom, this is not so complex, right? So this is, I meet the passing mark, I like, I don't like. Okay, so here, it's actually not very impactful. The arrow are wrong, actually. It's not very impactful because this is where a lot of training houses tend to focus on, is make sure on the day when I give out the feedback form, the smiley face, I get as many of the smiley face, the 5 stars, then I can go to whoever and say, hey, I've delivered. And to me, that's actually not an impactful, meaningful measurement. It's easy to administer because it's not complex at all. Okay, so the next level we're looking at will be, hey, I'm confident I can do the job. My behavior has changed. Now, how do you measure? That's a whole different effort involved in measuring this. So you need change management practice and learning culture to be able to lead to this conclusion. So question is, if you want to measure this type of outcome, then you need this kind of focal point as well, which is you need, aside from training the content, you need to also drive home the practice of doing and challenging mindset to actually make the change. Back to the earlier example, I talk about exercise. I could say, oh, I really need exercise. I've been sitting on my stool, on my chair for the longest time, but I will do nothing. But then for me to actually activate that is probably because something happened. My body's aching too much, doctor's warning me, so then I still may not make the change. But because there is certain other things, like for example, back to what we said, this thing here, right? If you want that kind of impact, the slide before, this one. If I can bring in the connection, I can bring in the contribution, the more I'm being able to contribute in this area or feel my involvement in this connection and contribution, then the higher up I'll go in this measurement. Okay. Now, from a business perspective, I'll say that my department has improved and the impact is felt. We have raised the standard of the industry. Okay, for this to happen, you need a lot of data. So you also need before data and after data. And this is why a lot of times up to this level and above, the ROI, which is this one, my investment has paid off. This upper section is ideal but usually the data is missing. So without the data, you cannot conclusively say your training has been good or your investment in the training is good. Okay. So I'll skip this in the interest of time. Okay, so just a few things here. I should probably just clear the screen here. Drawings. Okay. How many? Because of again, I don't have the chat and the video on. Maybe if I show the video, maybe just me see. I don't know where I lost the thing to. In any case, can somebody just say out if you've never heard of the term VAK?
Yeah, I've not heard.
Okay, VAK is a theory that talks about whether you're visual, audio, or kinesthetic learner. Okay, this has become such a hot cake and quoted by a lot of training houses. Actually, it's already been debunked. But that's my problem. That's the problem I see a lot in the industries. You get a new theory every other day. Everybody is coming up with a new theory. And I will ask one question before I answer why this is debunked. I ask you a question. Which came first? The theory came first or the behavior came first? It's not a trick question. Huh? Jonathan and Susan, both Susans are very quiet. Maybe you all can venture an answer. Which came first? Theories came first or behaviors?
I would say behaviors.
Thank you. Because out there, the way the academia is pushing theory, the industry is consuming those theories as if, oh, the theory tells me I'm supposed to behave like that. And then everybody's just hook, line, sinker. Back to the question, no critical thinking. I buy into the theory. But in essence, where did the theory come from? Those people who wrote the theories were observing the behaviors in the cohorts that they were observing. So if you and I, we all observe our own behavior, we are our own best subject to observe, then we can tell those theories are valid or not valid. So back to VAK, they separate the they say learning styles into those who are visual learners, those who use their hearing, audio, or learning, and then those who are kinesthetic, who needs to move around. Frankly, if you look at the fact that God gave us 5 physical senses, all to be able to process stimuli. We have eyes, we have that can perceive sight, we have ears that can perceive sound, we have smell, we have taste, we have touch, including the 6th sense, which is our spiritual sense. So God intends that we use all of them. So to me, to say that I learn visually, that means don't give me things that has audio. It's not really sound. But where I feel that there would be differences is some of us learn by reflecting, processing. So we may not be able to articulate an answer right away. So we need time to think, to process. So yes, it's the subsequent processing of the information that we are different. Some needs to speak out loud, repeat the word. So somebody, before they answer the question, they will say, so what? So is why the theory? Oh, teacher, there's something wrong there. The person needs to process it by speaking out. So it's the processing, it's not the stimuli. So yes, there are different of us process the information differently. So I just want to bring out to the fact that there are a lot of learning theories out there that we need to question. So eventually, when it comes to the workforce development, it really boils down to experience, practice, conversation, reflection. So some people, they need to go through the experience first, meaning the positive and the negative, before they can say truly understand what the learning is. Some people need to just do the practice over and over again. Some people need to talk about it. And some people need to sit and reflect. So the stimuli is the same. It's the way we process the information that may be different. Okay, and so this is a statement I'm making. Majority of the content out there creates dependencies. That means they tell us what to do. And they don't teach us to think, they teach us do. So whereas we need to be focusing on content that develop independence to think, to access, to reflect, and then to make sound decisions. In a way, sense making. I need to make sense of this information, this emotion, challenge my own emotion. Should I be feeling this way? Should I be reacting because everybody else is reacting? So I want to also, I'm getting towards the last few slides, say that as leaders, in a nutshell, this is how I would summarize it. As leaders, our role is to unblock, unlock, and to unleash. Essentially, what do we do with the unblock, unlock, and unleash? Is movement and flow of information, of resources, of goods, of finance, and of feedback. So we can help create the future instead of being led into the future. So on this, I want to say, what would it be? If we want to unleash new opportunities, we want to unlock potentials, we want to unblock bottlenecks. Okay, so Chen, this leads to the question, and this is pretty much my last slide. In terms of the skills that I believe people should be focusing on in terms of the area of focus, I split them into two: the evergreen competencies and the time-dependent competencies. Currently, a lot of academia is focused on time-dependent competencies. It'll be here today, gone tomorrow. But actually, we need to be focusing on the evergreen competencies to build the deep skill competency, to build that second nature early in the career preparation. These are, if you will, text I've thrown in is not cast in stone, it's still iterative. I'm just processing in my own head, having hired people, mentored people. So these are timeless skills: knowing how to communicate, how to relate, how to analyze, problem solve, how to access information, process the information, to reflect and to influence. Eventually building up the thinking skills, the pattern recognition, and then to be able to subsequently mentor and lead other people. Okay, the time-dependent ones are domain knowledge specific. Right, so you, depending whether you're in technology or in engineering, or you're in nursing, or you're in teaching, so you build your basic domain competency. You need to learn how to decide in simple scenarios or complex scenarios, recognizing the risk, and so on and so forth. I think it's self-explanatory, right? Eventually, as you move up the ladder, you should, be able to look at financial and market growth, directional vision, succession planning. So these are time dependent because it switches with, like, for example, if I build all this for, say, F&B, due to COVID, a lot of companies are shut down. A lot of the lessons learned are no longer applicable because during COVID time, everybody has to rethink through how they do their business. So this is where the skills they will be dependent on, the evergreen skills to rework the processes, the dimensions, and the visions. Okay, so basically my motto is don't worry about right or wrong, some precepts of course. Try it out. It's okay to fail. After you fail, reflect on it and learn what was causing the fail. And then consume the information, digest the information, reflect and relearn. So that's it. Q&A, whatever minutes we have left on that. Not bad. Under 1 hour I did it. So open discussion now.
Can you
I'll stop share.
Poh Moi, go back to the last slides, huh?
Oh, okay.
Just sorry.
No worries.
Just to
Which one is this? This one?
No, yeah. So, I mean, in the world we live now, in terms of learning, when things are happening at hyper speed, content is, I mean, it's humongous, right? I mean, with what's available online. What do you think are the key competency? I mean, there's so many, right? But what is really needed, in a world when there's fake news, we're inundated with content. So what is more important? I mean, for learning that
I
we
would say
should.
the evergreen competencies. You can change job, you can be young, you can be old. This will go with you for life, because right, knowing where to find the information. Because unlike yesteryears where we have to be the expert in whatever we need to be the expert in, now is you can access the information whenever you need it. Back earlier we were talking about looking at that one verse, right? You say, oh, go and Google for it. So there's no one need for us to get all caught up in knowing everything at all times. And is knowing where to find what and whether we trust the information. So basically it's being able to recognize. To me, very big one is pattern recognizing. A lot of decision making comes out of, oh, this is trending in that direction, it's red alert, or that's trending in the other direction, good, we're going to. Those are all, it comes from pattern recognition. So if we can get the young people to start building this, the lower section, like I say, you can just attend courses, go to the internet, go to platforms, have a discourse with someone. You don't really okay. So for example, maybe this taking this I've said, right, applying, communicating, relating, analyzing. So these are the baseline skills from the evergreen you bring into deciding whether it's simple scenarios or complex scenarios of recognizing risk. So the unblocking or the unleashing skills are this set. Those are just the triggers or the content you massage.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I thought pattern recognition is interesting because, in the technology world, right, we talk about big data, right? And people are saying that data is the new oil or the new natural, new resource, right? And it is being mined. The more data we have, whether it's Google or Facebook or whatever, they are helping presidents win or lose, right? Rightly or wrongly.
Right.
So is it really in the area of, recognizing patterns through, mining of a lot of data?
I will speak a little bit into that. Even pattern recognition without the data, it's what the Holy Spirit is. You really want to talk about the spiritual side, the faith side of things. Pattern recognition is really what the Holy Spirit leads us and whispers to us. And why I'm saying that is, just using a real experience. I was traveling alone in somewhere in Kyushu in Japan, and then I met this gal. Interestingly, she's actually from China, but she's kind of working long term in Japan. So she's as good as being a Japanese, although she's Chinese. So we traveled together. This experience I'm about to describe is something not new to anyone, but it's poignant to the description I want to bring. She, like all young people, will pull out her GPS, turn it on, and then she will just travel according to what the data tells her. Turn here. And then, oh, funny, it says turn here, but there's nothing here, kind of thing. So I was saying to her, I said, I understand you're like that, but you know what you have sacrificed is the fact that while completely dependent on the data from the GPS, the ability to use the eyes to recognize which building in correlationship to where I'm standing, the ears to listen the nose to smell, there's a bakery here. So all of this, back to what we said, the five senses, six senses that God has given us, it's very underdeveloped, understimulated, because we're so dependent on database to tell us. So I was saying, okay, fine. So next time you need to go make this trip again, you've got to turn on the GPS again. But for me, because what I did was I have a base reference of the map from the night before, and then I use my eyes, like I said, all the different senses. I can make that same trip again without the GPS. So pattern recognition is something that if we over depend on technology, we sacrifice the abilities that God has given us. And we really need to temper that a bit. Pattern recognition is speed that we appreciate the data, but it's without the speed, we should also be able to use our own senses to do pattern recognition.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Poh Moi, it's Jonathan here.
Hi, Jonathan.
Yeah, hey, thanks for sharing all of this. I think this is very useful for the work environment, so adult project environment. How do you think this applies to children and growth and development over the years? So I'm asking this obviously in the context of me having young kids, but when the child is in secondary school, do some of this. So how do you think like childhood pedagogy should be planned or directed so that all this will eventually come? So you know, more in reference to the way Singapore runs its education system.
Okay, your last sentence is a bit lost in the quality of the audio, but I think I know the context of your question. Yeah, so in the next part 2 or part 3, I'll be talking about pedagogy versus andragogy. You're right, the premise of a lot of what I'm sharing is more for adults. But I'm pleasantly surprised, Jonathan, recently I discovered that which is public access, the student learning system set up by MOE. And even the teachers are encouraged in the school now to develop resources, basically to, I think part of MOE's directive, which is also related to the manpower side, is teaching students to know how to search for information, how to check the relevance of the information, and then how to use that information to do their project work. So I see that even in the school's curriculum, they're beginning to go in that direction. So this used to be adult responsibilities, but it is now being brought into younger age group. I think that's okay. Perhaps the thing that it would be different, of course, is there should be a bit more hand-holding, more scaffolding for the younger people as opposed to the adults. The other thing, of course, is the degree of complexity will be lesser for school-going kids. So I think every opportunity parents can have, I'll take a real situation from a family I know. The daughter is probably 14, 15 years old, has been having some issues and recently declared she's pansexual. To me, if the reaction is to become black and white about it, it will push into the forbidden fruit zone, which is not going to be useful. But to take that and immediately, or for that matter, Harry Potter's books, or any controversial type of not opportunity, but anything that offers a controversial type of genre or situation, that's the best for any parents to take it as a chit-chat session. My accountant was just telling me her teenage kids who are not voting age yet, but the next election they will be, and they ask her the question. So does it mean that we should not vote for opposition? You know, so those are very good opportunities to process. So basically, at young age, the thing we are trying to teach them is the discipline, the processing. Okay, so for example, one of the things that I always felt as a point of contention is when we, in the age group that I'm in, we used to memorize the 12 times table. And today's world, they all say, what for, right? But I think back to the fact that in the age group that we were in, it was actually causing my brain muscle to work. It was causing discipline to form in my brain. Granted, I don't have to memorize it today, but what it did help me at that time was it helped my brain to create the neurons. It helped my brain to form the correlation. All those are moving parts and pieces that eventually the adult person will draw or grow from, if you will. So I think teaching the child the act of processing, get them to debate. So, okay, why do you think you should or should not support the opposition member? Debate it out. Get them to just articulate it. So the act of building that discipline of verbalizing, healthily disagreeing, and to even access information. I found this website that said this. Okay, why did you go to that website? What other website did you check? So it's all of these are opportunities for the child to, in a sense, build fundamental skills, which they will be well benefited in the days to come when they enter adulthood. Because a lot of the, I would say, those who are in the 25 to 35, they were never given, or quite a big percentage were never groomed in that type of basic competencies. So they are all in this age group where they are reactionary, they are loud, especially in the US. If I disagree with you, I just raise my voice, I will just yell down at you, and I'll just make sure you have no voice. Because they never learned any of the skills when they were growing. I hope that helps.
Yes, that's very good. I actually, I kind of like pick up a few things. I mean, eventually on your slide, what you're saying is that I believe every person should have these kind of disease, which are ever, and that I think we would have it within ourselves, not rely on other things or people. But if there are other people, meaning not just about childhood, so maybe something that our teachers say to us, or something that our parents like and why, so we don't have a chance to debate or discuss about it. So what as he brought up, he mentioned also about relying too much on computers. Like I had issues with GPS also. That is the wrong location. So in a sense, what I'm looking at is, we learn to train ourselves building these computers, not people, other people are gonna think. I think related to that, maybe the third thing is just like life matter, controversy. In a way, it's more evident in the culture in the West, where everyone opinion. So therefore, they may have gone through some disease that also that but points whatever they have included, and therefore you have a mix of messages. And this is the world that we are living with. So
Jonathan, I practically cannot hear much of what you say. I apologize for that because the audio feed is,
I'm so sorry.
yeah.
Is this okay?
This much better. Yeah, I mean, I have to speak a bit louder.
Okay, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Maybe it's my headset. But essentially, I was just thinking out loud that if everyone built their own evergreen competencies, you would have everyone sharing their own opinion, and you will end up having a marketplace of communication. For example, like BLM, where everyone's just throwing his or her own opinion. And this is the kind of world that we live in, or we would live in, if everybody built their own competency. So I'm just trying to link the culture that we are living in, or we are going to live in, and how we as Christians ought to engage.
See, the fact that they have an opinion is not itself the bad thing. They've lost. I mean, America. I don't want to spend too much time in that context. I'll bring it back. The fact that used to be a place where you can disagree vehemently, and after that, go to lunch. That's so beautiful about America back then. But the new generation, social media is a big contributing factor, has lost the ability to debate. So I question the fact that my generation, we didn't have as much voice. Keep quiet, listen. But in the last 10, 15 years, the younger generation have been encouraged to express themselves, voice themselves. So you would think that they would at least be able to debate. But what we see now, and back to your earlier question, Jonathan, what we see, at least my observation, is that a lot of younger generation today, they don't know how to use language to express. They use emotion to express. Either louder voice, horrible words, threats, and whatever. But they don't know how to use language to express, which is a fundamental basic competency for a civil society. And so that's why in the days to come, obviously people might say, hey, my children are learning all this thing, actually be bullied by the others. In the business world, so I bring it back. In the business world, you see one scenario that's going to be a very, it's already there. Most of the CEOs, they anyway are responsible for succession, right? They are looking out for who they can groom to be the successor. Who would they go for? By virtue of stakeholders, shareholders, they will need to look for somebody whom they can trust, somebody who can speak, somebody who can make good decisions, somebody who is a team player. Who better to sit in that state, that shortlisting, but then the believers who have all these values. The ones who are screaming their head off at the bottom, I use the word bottom because they can't make themselves go up, because one New York Times editor was forced out of a job because she has an opinion that's different. So we're seeing more and more of this happening, and bosses sitting at the very top, while they want to be politically correct, they still need to make sure there's a business. So they are always they're struggling like crazy up there. To bring it back, one more illustration is teenagers are by nature easily influenced by convenience. Whatever is convenient, they will go for it. So businesses recognize that. And a lot of the solutioning in the technical world, in the consumer world, is wrapped around convenience. But yet, convenience is the very reason why scams and viruses can attack. So one way to be less vulnerable to scams and viruses, all that, is to not go the path of convenience. But it's very hard if this conversation is not held with the young people, even before they start moving in that direction, to think about, is convenience the right parameter to use for your decisions? So those conversations can happen at home. When you go to a food court, why do you want to eat this? What's the consequence? So this discussion of decision and consequence, I find that is very lacking in a lot of the younger, conversations with younger people. Anyone can make decision, but they have to face the consequence of their decision.
It's also, for us as parents to learn how to think that way. So,
Slightly louder, please.
it's also up to us as parents to learn how to think that way and to be able to mentor our children that will think that. So I guess the short form that I would say is that parenting is not about teaching children; it's about learning about ourselves, so that we end up releasing it to our children. So all this applies to being a parent.
I once made this comment. I said the people who do proactive management in offices, they are parents. But when they go home, they don't do the same. Proactive management is to preempt and you do what it takes to prevent. I don't see that happening at home. So one of the things that really can benefit is to take that mindset and go, okay, before they enter this age group, before they start getting, okay, what can I dialogue with them? How can I guide them in a proactive way?
Okay.
And I think the other.
Sorry.
I think we need to take offline because we are veering away from measurement.
I would suggest, Jonathan, you can follow up with Poh Moi, because it's getting past the time. So I'm conscious of it. So I think we can close. So thanks, Poh Moi, for sharing, your experiences and your expertise. And
I hope it's useful.
You can always reach out to, we can always reach out to you. Yeah, I think there's a lot to digest, at least for me, from what you have shared. So it will take me some time to chew. So thanks all for attending. So we will see y'all, hopefully some of y'all in some of our other classes or webinars. Okay. Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Good night.
Okay. Good night.